Hello and welcome to Manibil, and welcome back to my small deconstruction of a 10-minute, 9-minute long rant from Mr. Molyneux on moral relativism and that it is control. And I left up at around the 5-minute mark, and I think I'll just get straight back into the thing.
And people also don't get very ferocious and sort of grab you by the shoulders and yell at you that there's no such thing as a better or worse car color. It's like, because that's kind of understood. So
Better or worse. Now, you're using the terms better or worse, but you haven't defined what you mean by better or worse, right? It would be it's the point of ethics, in my opinion, is that if you believe that is something that is good or bad in this idea, right? This idea of good or bad, what does that entail, right? You're not proving anything by just starting to use the words, right? If I say bibilop, right? Yeah, I experienced bibilop, right? You would say, what the hell is a bibilop, right? If you start to the first person who start to use the words good and or bad, people will start to ask, what do you mean? Well, good and bad. Yeah, what do you mean? What are those words? What are they covering? What are they describing? What are they referring to, right? And if you are, as you obviously seem to be, an empiricist, and you're talking about science and objectivity and all these things, and in the same mouthful as you're mentioning morality and ethics and virtue and all these standards and so on, right? There must be some connection between empiricism and morality, which is a catch-all term for good and bad and, these terms, right? So what is it? What do you mean by good and bad, right? It's not given, right? There's nothing that is given. That's why you're doing philosophy, in order to qualify what you mean by these particular terms, right? You can't start philosophizing and say, yeah, I'm just bringing in all these terms that have already been defined by somebody, apparently, right? When you're doing philosophy, you are starting from scratch. Or at least that's the approach I would ask for. Otherwise, I won't take it seriously, right? So, by saying something good or bad, right, you need to point out what the hell you mean by that, right? And you can't just throw another term in that also needs a definition, and then another term that can define those definitions, and so on. Then it will just fade into, it will just, flow into the sand, so, and disappear into thin air, right? It has to refer directly to something, or at least to a set of axioms or definitions and so on, that ultimately leads to something I can experience, not least because you call yourself an empiricist and talk about objectivity and these things, right? So this why I'm called this sort of a word salad tsunami, right? He thinks, apparently, implicitly, if I should interpret it, he just needs to throw words at it, and then he has proven something. Proven, right? I don't like the term proof in philosophy, because that's not what you do in philosophy. Philosophy you can do philosophy in order to define what you mean by a proof. Well, that means you cannot use a proof to define philosophy, right? Or get to anything in philosophy. Philosophy is not about proving. It is about settling how you understand your experience and what you do with it, right? That's basically what it's about. It's just a very strict and to the point description of what you are referring to. And in order for things to be strict, it needs to point, if not directly, then in very few steps indirectly, to something that can be directly experienced.
given that, like, the sophists among us know that if they can convince us that there's no such thing,
Like you, right? If you're not using these sort of first principles and so on, you are a sophist, right? Because then it's about words and juggling words around to get the upper hand in the discussion or something like that, right? If you're not referring to some ground floor kind of thinking, and I might refer to my own at this point in time, the best version is a video I did sort of a year ago, I think, called Metaphysics, Idealism Without Woo-Woo, right? And you can wind back in my history and watch that video, please, right? To get an idea where I stand. There's also a part 0 of my deconstruction of his UPB book, where I extend, and I think it's the start of the UPB book, but I might actually be wrong. It might be Essential Philosophy book. There's a part 0 at least, right? So you can go there in his. I think it's the UPB book, but I might be remembering correctly, because there's these 3 books of his I've deconstructed, right? And there you can also get an overview of my standpoint within these basics in philosophy, right? And I am considering making a new, even more cohesive and to the point kind of video series on my stance on philosophy, right? But it's also, I'm working on this book and so on, which is taking a long time, and it's almost like I'm afraid to write it. I wouldn't say I'm afraid, but it's a fucking tough job to get things. Simplicity is difficult, right? You won't believe how difficult it is, or cumbersome maybe, right? But keeping things simple without oversimplifying. At the same time, avoiding being too elaborate, right? Bringing in things you don't need to bring in, all this, right? His attempt or approach is an example of how I would never want it to be, right? I want it to be as strict and clear as possible. That's the, in my opinion, the reason why there is an idea of philosophy. Philosophy should be anti-artistic. It shouldn't be about, I can use these fancy words and I butter you up your ears and smoothen your whatever by using these fancy terms and Shakespearean and Dickensian whatever, right? No, it's about being fucking strict with the terms and staying with them and being, point 1, point 2, and then this conclusion and this statement and this definition and this axiom and so on, right? Building from this axiom, now I'm going this way. It's very, very, very strict and to the point. It's unartistic, or at least that's what the approach should be, because what a philosopher should be wanting to do is to make sure that there is no fucking way this presentation of my thinking can be misunderstood. So you wouldn't want to sit in an echo chamber throwing around words in this kind of agitated word salad, right? If you're a good philosopher, you wouldn't want to do that. He has done that for 15 years, man, and written some awfully, some books that are below, even way below average philosophy, right? To be nice. Okay.
As truth or virtue or values, then we won't pursue those things in general, because and we're doing that because we're pursuing the truth value that there's no such thing as truth value.
Truth value, but truth value, now truth and value has been combined here, right? Without any clear definition, right? Yeah, you can always say, but in a podcast 4 years ago I made a definition, and all right. But it's this tsunami approach, right? Rather than taking it, okay, no, but starting with the metaphysics, and then this, and then this must follow this, and therefore it follows that, and so on, right? He's just throwing words at you, right? he's not interested in good philosophy. That should be obvious, right? He is interested in hearing himself talk and making himself feel good about how he comes across, right? He's very interested in his own image. He's very concerned about his own philosophical, whatever, right? And also all these books he's writing, these fiction books. Why the hell would somebody interested in philosophy write fiction books of all things, right? Fiction books is the opposite of philosophy, in my opinion, because you're trying to maybe take some philosophy and then dilute it with all sorts of conjured up fiction, right? Why not get to the point, right? So there's so many things that you should take into account in the judgment of whether or not somebody attempting to present their philosophy are actually good at philosophy, right? And 99 out of 100 times, they're usually full of shit, right? They're confirmation bias. They have an inflated ego, or all these psychological things, right? Or they're just they are self-medicating their anxiety or existential problems using philosophy in order to calm the nerves or something like that. They want this particular version of reality to be the case, and then they're going to find some philosophy here and there's philosophy there and piece it all together. So see, I ended up with what I wanted, right? It's so prevalent. I have yet to find, so just like Diogenes walking around the streets of whatever Athens with a lamp saying, I'm looking for a good philosopher and actually an honest philosopher, right? I have not seen one yet, right? The closest thing, I guess, is myself. That sounds a little, self-indulgent or whatever it's called, right? What I mean by it is that when I try to deconstruct other potential, decent philosophers, I always find huge holes and huge leaps of imagination, or just taking things for granted, or it's like everywhere, right? Everybody seems to suck at philosophy. It's like it's everywhere. There's always, there's somebody, when I found Bernardo Castro, for instance, I was like, wow, this guy is different, right? Oh, idealism, okay, fine. Well, that's interesting because very few philosophers are actually idealists, right? But some are at least, right? That's a good thing, right? But then he starts to cycle into all sorts of woo-woo shit that is so ridiculous that I'm like, what the... And it's okay, then why the hell would he want to do that? Oh, his father was a scientist, his mother was a Christian, and Latino Christian. So it's like, okay, he has anxiety, his father died young, and I'm just trying to explain it, right? He wants to, justify a combination of science and woo-woo, right? So that his anxiety goes away, or at least is, inhibited somewhat, right? I might be wrong in that, but, it doesn't really matter for the philosophy, you could say, right? It doesn't matter what incentive people have. If it's bad philosophy, it's bad philosophy, right? And my deepest concern is that I shouldn't take any, just because I like a person or don't like a person, or sort of they are weird, it is the arguments, it's the statements, it's the philosophy from A to B to C and so on that is the call, right? Is it good philosophy? Isn't it good philosophy done, right? But I always find huge problems in people's philosophy. So I am sticking to my own so far, right? I might take a little, inspiration here and there, right? And if anything, it might just, solidify myself in my own philosophy.
And when they then manipulate morals, right, which they'll...
I think you have to, just to break in here, concerning my statement about, I think my own philosophy is the best, right? If you don't think that your own philosophy is the best philosophy, you need to find out what the problem is and solve it, right? Because you need to be on top of it, right? It's not like you should say, okay, I got it perfect, just like Stefan Molyneux 15 years ago. It's perfect. I found the Holy Grail. It doesn't need to be improved. Oh, I'm so good, right? It's not like it can't be improved or anything like that. But if it needs improvement, you are going to do the improvement in order to fix the shit, right? Now, if you are swallowing whole what somebody else says, it's not good, even if it's good philosophy. You haven't justified it. You're just eating it hook, line, and sinker. That's not how you're being a good philosopher, right? I bet you that all those known philosophers in history, they were very concerned that am I actually the best philosopher, right? Is my philosophy coherent? And maybe some of them weren't, right? But does it hang together? Is it cohesive and all this, right? Before I write a treatise on whatever, right? Otherwise, they would look fucking stupid, man, right? If they had any concern for their for their own integrity and their own the stature of their being, so to say, right? So it's like if somebody calling themselves philosopher and presenting their philosophy don't seem to have made any improvement or any changes for forever, right? It might be because they are actually not really good at philosophy. They have just come up with something that fits their narrative and then sticking to it and trying sophistically to convince you that they're right in order for them to create a world of at least some people who agree with them, right? This sort of cultish approach to things, right? It's my way or the highway kind of. Now, I'm not saying that you should encompass everybody's philosophy. If it's crap, I wouldn't do that either, right? But I would be able to illuminate others where I stand based on some fundamental building blocks, right? In a discussion or so on, not like he did with me. He just shouted at me and muted me out of a conversation and kept talking for 20 minutes without me being able to interrupt or say, hey, that's an incorrect understanding of what I was trying to say and so on, right? So that's what he does because he's a crap philosopher, right?
Well, inevitably do, right? All the people who are postmodernists who say there's no such thing as truth or virtue or value will, absolutely scream at you for things that they have defined as evil, as immoral, and so they don't believe any of it. But what they want to do is...
But isn't that what you're doing? You're talking about good and evil, right? You're just labeling things as good and evil. So it's just relative to your standards, right? I'm not saying you can't do that, but don't blame others for doing what you're doing yourself. You're throwing around the terms good and evil and good and bad and, and so on, the devil and whatever, regularly. And the foundation isn't functioning, even if you think that your so-called UPB is a functional approach to whatever it is you're doing. I can tell you that it isn't. There isn't anything there. There isn't a proof of anything, right? First of all, you can't prove philosophy. Secondly, what you're doing in that proof is so ridiculously moronic that it takes a level of ignorance of what it takes to do good philosophy that is beyond my wildest fucking dreams, right? It's a pile of horse shit what you have written in UPB, right? And you're basically trying to connect the dots so you will arrive what you already understand as a moral principle, which is the non-aggression principle. I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but you're just connecting the dots to get what you want, right?
They want you to not have an objective standard by which you can push back against.
Okay, give me that fucking objective standard, right? Give me that fucking objective standard. What do you mean by a standard? What do you mean by objective, right? And is an objective standard the same as a moral principle? You see, these terms are just, he's alluding to something and pulling back, right? Talking about a standard, pulling back. He's talking about morality, pulling back. It's sort of, and staying in his, tsunami of word salads here, right?
Hence their moral manipulations. Like, please understand this, fundamental to understanding the modern world. People who tell you that there's no such thing as truth and virtue, objective truth and virtue.
But if it's relative, you are not saying that there's no such thing, right? So you're strawmanning what he's trying to get an answer to, right? Moral relativism is not the same as saying there is no moral. It isn't. It can't be, but then it can't be relative. If it doesn't exist or there is no such thing, it can't be relative to anything, right? So there has to be some morality in order for it to be relative. So if you're talking about there is no such thing, you have misunderstood what it means to have moral relativism, right?
Virtue, everything's relative, everything's subjective. They are planning on hijacking moral definitions in order to control society. And they desperately need you to not have an objective moral standard by...
Okay, so if they don't want you to have a moral objective standard, that means that you're implicitly saying there is a moral objective standard. Now, would you mind fucking tell me what that fucking objective moral standard is, right? And how you get to it. Give me the philosophy that enables you to say, hey, a moral standard, right? Objective moral standard.
By which to push back. They want you to abandon the field so that they can come in and define whatever they want in order to gain power and control other people, right? So all the people who were like, well,
yeah, that might be the case. But those who are having appealing to any kind of objective moral standard, they also want to control. They just want to control using an objective moral standard, right? Because what I'm hearing is somebody saying, I want a moral standard I can inflict on you in order to control you. You're not saying, I have a principle that I am following, right? You are explicit in this kind of, I want to have a principle I can inflict on you. Why don't you grab your own tits and say, no, this is what I'm going to do, right? I have found this moral principle and I'm going to follow it, right? So it's about you as an individual. What are you going to do? You will also be implying that everybody has to do the same thing. You can't be some kind of authority walking around telling people what to do, right? That's the Christian fallacy, that somebody comes and say, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, right? We have to get rid of this fucking fallacy, man.
You got to take this medication or this treatment or whatever because you care about other people, don't you? You don't want other people to be harmed. It's like those are the same people running up multi-tens of trillions of dollars of national debt and having children born into $1 million worth of slavery. Like, they don't care about the debt, but they know you care, right? So if you have an objective and universal moral definition of the good, universally...
Okay, if you have, but do you have, right? I don't have an objective definition of morality because I can't get to it, right? It's impossible. But if you think you can, would you mind presenting it rather than just talking about it, walking around it, sort of, if you have it, and if I had a moral, just state the fucking moral standard, right? If it's so important, why don't you do it, right? It's like saying, everybody needs water to survive, right? Yeah, and if you have water, I think you should drink it. Yeah, but what do you mean by water? If I haven't seen that water, it's only sort of a fairy tale myth or something like that, right? And people are talking, I don't think water exists and so on. Then you're talking about water as if it exists. Would you mind showing me what the hell it is? If I haven't seen it yet, right? Would you mind?
The preferable behavior, right? non-aggression.
Oh, so you're just referring to the phrase you have reformulated morality into being universally preferable behavior, so you don't have to actually argue. You can just say these magical words called universally preferable behavior, as if you have settled something, right? Bullshit.
Principle property rights. Then when people come and try and control you by manipulating your moral compass, they say, this is the good, this is the evil. Now, if you have a universal standard to push back against it, they can't control you.
No, but if I have, okay, what if I don't have? Do you have one? If I don't have one, I would like to have yours then. At least I would like to try it on for size, right? Would you mind stating it to me, man? And you have to, you can't just make a statement. You can't just say, hey, yeah, that bucket over there, that's water. I would like to know, okay, how do you know that it's water, right? It's pink and it smells of dead frogs or something like, right? Why is this water? No, you have to trust me. I have found the Holy Grail. It's water. It's like, nah, I'm not sure about that, right? You have to argue, right? You have to present your philosophy, how you get to things. You can't just hand out conclusions, as I said in the first part, I think, right? Handing out conclusions is not philosophy. It's actually stupid sophistry, right?
Based upon that, they can't control you if you have an objective moral definition of virtue.
So, what is actually then your approach to morality? It's not a control of anything? You don't want to, you're actually not saying that you don't want to control, you just don't want those people over there to control you with their weird version of morality. But what is the purpose of your morality then? Isn't it controlling? What is it then? Is it self-control? It doesn't sound like it to me, right? It doesn't sound like you're saying, yeah, I'm going to follow this. And I have objectivity because of this. And this is the principle, or this is the standard, and it's defined like this, and using these terms, and pointing to this kind of metaphysics, and so on, right? Never, right?
If you don't, then it's like you've got a compass. You're going to follow that compass, right? What they want to do is be able to move the magnets. They want to be able to move the magnets, so you'll just follow the virtue however they define it, right? So,
So now he's also conflating morality, ethics, standards, and what was the word he just used? Sorry, let me take it again here.
Follow that compass, right?
Virtue, right? So it is also this conflation of words. Sort of there's a word salad. A lot of fancy words. It sounds like he's a philosopher, right? He's just a pretender, right? A pretender, right? The great pretender.
They want to do is be able to move the magnets. They want to be able to move the magnets, so you'll just follow the virtue however they define it, right? So, Nazism is evil, right? But they say, oh.
No, but if you have what is sort of an elusive kind of, it would be a holy grail of philosophy, I would say, if you can point to an objective way of reaching a moral principle, or a moral principle that at least describes some kind of objectivity, right? That's the holy grail, if anything is the holy grail in ethics, right? But what you have to do when you're checking out somebody else's philosophy is, how does this philosophy, which is ethics, connect with the prior philosophies, right? Which would be something like objectivity, knowledge, and metaphysics, right? Depending on how you define metaphysics. But at least there's some kind of thinking you have to settle before you do epistemology, in my opinion. How does that thinking follow back to the sort of reduction base, which is sort of the foundations of the metaphysics? That's the starting point. That's where you start, right? That's the blank slate, or the slate, right? The first notes on the slate, that's the reduction base. That's what. How does this connect in all these words? There is no connection. Because he's just full of fucking words, right? He's a hot air balloon full of words. And if you prick a hole in it, it just spouts out philosophical terms, right?
Oh, well, there's no such thing. There's objective truth, objective virtue, objective value.
So objective truth, hang on, mate, right? You are conflating, combining words like truth and objective. Can objective truth, right? Is there subjective truth then? What is the difference between truth and objective truth? Can you get truth without it being objective? And what's the difference, right? You're just throwing around words, mate. To do something rigid for once, right? Establish some fucking first principles. And so the reduction base, this is where I'm starting. And I build from there and I get to this definition and this axiom and so on. And see, lo and behold, pops out an objective standard, right? But you can't do it the other way. You can't just jump in and spend 10 minutes throwing words at me and thinking you have done something, man.
But Nazism is evil, right? Well, you can't have it both ways, right? If Nazism is evil, we have to say why. Well, it's socialistic, it's the initiation of the use of force, it's collectivistic, and so on. It's like, okay, well then.
Initiation of the use of force. That's I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad idea to follow the non-aggression principle, but it's just not well argued. I have never seen any decent proof of the non-aggression principle, right? And I'm not buying his way of doing it, creating a system in 80 pages that can validate the non-aggression principle. It doesn't work, and his proof of it is ridiculously stupid, right? So, yeah, it's the same old story with this dude, right?
Then you've got a problem with communism too, right? But so there's no such thing as truth, there's no such thing as virtue, there's no such thing as value. It means...
No, if it's relative, there has to be some value that is relative to something or some other value, right? No, what moral relativism would be is that, well, my value is as good as your value, right? You can't come and tell me there's a standard for what is valuable and what isn't valuable, right? And I would agree with that. Because if you're saying that you have a moral standard or a standard for value, then that's based on your subjective experiences, right? Otherwise, you have some kind of God syndrome where you think that some external entity is handing you some kind of objectivity to you, right? How the hell would that work? So it's starting from a subjective stand, and then at some point in your mind, you're upgrading that to a objective standard by some metrics I don't get, right? And I don't think that you can get to, but you haven't alluded to how you do that. It doesn't become objective just because you want it to be, right? You have to explain yourself.
We don't want anything that you can navigate by rationally on your own. We want to destroy your sense.
So now he's using the term rationally, right? So it's again the same situation all the time he does this. And he's been doing this for going on more than a decade, right? Or maybe 15 years or so, right? Maybe 20 years. Is this word tsunami, right? He's just throwing these so sort of philosophical terms at you. It's only to try to hook you in, right? He's never going to give you anything, right? When you deconstruct what he says, it doesn't hang together. There is nothing there. There's no coherence at all, right? Very little. There is particularly no coherence where there needs to be strict coherence, right? He has never presented his first principles. He has never presented a reduction base. Basically what he does is, well, we don't need to do that, right? We have a lot of work to do in this UPB book, so I don't need to define any metaphysics or epistemology or objectivity, right? Fuck off, man.
That you can navigate and universalize virtues and values, and therefore we can put you on the train tracks, right? Whoever defines the good controls the future. I'm telling you this.
He's basically saying to you, you're stupid, right? He's basically saying, I think you're stupid. You are beholden to, what's it called? You are you have a weakness to these people who might, screw with your mind, right? No, don't trust them. Let me screw with your mind instead, right? Give me money.
Whoever defines the good controls the future. And so if the good is something that you can process, like UPB, you can process, you can universalize, you can use to push back against this kind of control and manipulation.
The best you can do with somebody claiming morality is pointing out some contradictions in their stupid morality. You can't tell people what morality they should have. Who are you to do that? What kind of being do you think you are? But what you can do is try to avoid, right, of getting away from them and the what they inflict on you, right? Who are you? You are implicitly appealing to a authority, going around checking up on people, right? Because if it doesn't work on its own accord, the next step is, okay, we better control people, right? They have to be put in prisons, and I have to do this, and I have to be, whatever, right? That's the problem. I would rather have my run-of-the-mill moral relativism than somebody like you, who obviously want to create a pretense of a scientific objective standard for how you should live with other people, right? And he's going to be the one telling you what it is without arguing rigidly and philosophically for it, right? I would rather have somebody who says, well, it's relative, fine. Then I have my own standards, fine. They would have to accept that I would have to be able to have my own standards. This guy won't let you have your own standards, right? Because he will label you as a moral relativist and put you in the gulags, right?
Then you control your future. UPB is the most empowering thing known to man because it has you push back against the sophists who want to put you on the train track that they're designing, that they're in control of. And if they can put you on their train track and say, well, this is the good and this is the evil, and you can't reason.
I remember there was this black dude that he sort of had some Christian talks with 4 or 5 years ago. I don't remember his name. He was some priest or preacher, some dude from Christianity, right? And he had this sort of half-ass Christian philosophical approach to Stefan Molyneux, right? And at one point he said to him, "Oh man, I feel very much like I want to punish people," right? I remember that very clearly. He said that to him, right? I don't remember what that dude he answered. I don't remember the rest of it, but I very clearly remember him say, "Oh, I'm paraphrasing a bit, right? I so badly want to punish people, right? Right? So that's just under the surface, right? The existential angst and the anxiety of other people, and I mean, I can understand that in the scenario we're living in with this all parasitical dominating state that has a pretense of democracy, right? I can understand the urge, but when he says, "I want to punish people," right? It's a different beast. He wants to jump in to excuse, at some point, he wants to excuse that fine principle he has of non-aggression, right? Because at some point, he thinks he needs to do it, and he needs to label it as non-aggression. He wants to be aggressive, punish people, right? But it has to be shrouded in some kind of non-aggression. So he has to figure out some kind of sophist excuse for why this is an aggression, just like he did with George Floyd, right? Somebody pressing their fucking knee on the neck of a person until they choke to death. And he's trying to argue for why this isn't aggression, right? At the same time as he says yelling at your children is of course aggression. So I'm not saying that it's not aggression to yell at your children. But if that's aggression, then fucking choking people to death with your knee is also aggression, right? Otherwise, it will never work, this non-aggression principle, because it is apparently up to whether or not Stefan Molyneux think can justify for you whether or not it is. And then it's not a principle. Because if you need some kind of hotline to somebody else in order to do it or apply it, you can't live a normal life, god damn it, right?
Reason about it. So what they're saying is you can't reason about good and evil. You can't reason about objective values and morality. You can't reason about these things. Therefore, they get to define them in a way that allows them to pursue and maintain and expand their control over you. Right? So if you say non-aggression principle and property rights is the virtue, then the welfare state is a violation.
Well, if you say, but what kind of fucking stupid argument? If you say this, that's not philosophy, man, right? If you say this, fuck off, man. Oh, man. Oh, man. It's incredible there are still people following this asshole, right? He's so incredibly bad at philosophy. It's mind-blowing, man, that that I'm actually spending time on him. It's because he's so awfully bad at it. I need to tell you, right? I can't help it, man.
Of those things, but if they can say, well, caring for others is a virtue, and the only way we can do it is through the welfare state. Well, I want to care for others. You can't reason about it. You can't reason about it. They turn the science of ethics.
No, people are, of course, it's the old problem with your masters, right? Do what the emperor tells you and the rest is up to philosophy, but always pay your taxes and so on, right? So you have to accommodate this, imposing entity that you haven't chosen yourself to accommodate. And one way to do it is to say, you can't give me any more rules of any kind, right? In order to push back on your attempt at creating this universal objective principle. I'm not saying you can't do that, but please argue for it rigidly and philosophically. Otherwise, I'm not buying it, right?
Into the superstition of obedience. Once they've got that, they've got you in the future until.
I thought that he said something like that. Obedience. No, he's talking about obedience. God gave you some rules. He gave you free will. Now figure it out, right? Obey the rules of God. Ooh. Fuck off, man, right? So maybe that's what he's trying to do. Philosophy is where we discuss, but he's bringing in God telling you what to do, right? Or Jesus telling you. He wants that hammer of saying, this is what you do. 10 commandments, fuck you, and you can be killed if you don't follow the 10. Whatever. I'm just trying to guess out of the blue here, right? Oh, man, he's ugly. I don't mean his appearance. I mean his philosophy, right?
You start asking some very basic questions.
I just did, Mr. Molyneux, right?
Oh, righty.
So you can't apparently. You don't even understand that what you need to present in order for it to be good philosophy. And if it's not good philosophy, what you're doing, what does that say about the people who follow you, right? And I understand that when you start in some kind of philosophy, you are prone to following whatever sounds right to you and follow down that path and so on, right? Without actually realizing, did I do this on my own accord, or did I just eat raw what I wanted to eat in philosophy, right? That point of sort of confirmation bias, right? So, okay, I think this is the end of this one. Luckily, it's only 10 minutes long, so I can stay in a two-parter here, right? So please share, like, and subscribe. Consider the board down below. I wouldn't mind a donation if you have the spare money. Also, there are links below, I think, and there are crypto links on the Discord board. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you next time.